the EMC Air Quality Committee meeting. As always, we start with the reading of General Statute 138A-15, which mandates that the chair inquire as to whether any member knows of any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to matters before the committee. If any member knows of a conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict, please so state at this time. Being none, Commissioner Smith, did you hear that?
I did not.
Do you have a conflict or potential conflict?
I do not.
Okay. All right, so first item is approval of the minutes from the meeting November 12th, 2025. We have any comments about the minutes? If not, can I get a motion to approve?
This is Yvonne Bailey. I move to approve the minutes.
Commissioner Bailey moves to approve. Do we have a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. Next item is concept. Rule revisions for website noticing of draft air quality permits. Ashley Hoskin.
Good morning, I'm Ashley Hoskin with the DAQ, and I'll be presenting the concept for website permit public notices. So these are some acronyms that are going to be used throughout the presentation. So for some background, the Clean Air Act requires permitting authorities to provide the opportunity for public participation in the processing of air permits, and the Environmental Protection Agency's air permitting regulations further clarify the methods for states to meet the public notice obligations. So prior to 2016, the EPA's rules for the Major New Source Review and Title V air permitting programs required newspaper publication to advertise draft permits, since those rules were originally promulgated in the 1980s and the 1990s, prior to the electronic media age. Over the years, availability of and access to the internet and other forms of electronic media have increased significantly in the United States. One effect of this development is that circulation of newspapers and other print media is declining, making printed newspaper notice less effective in providing widespread public notice of permit actions. In addition, many permitting authorities have been posting draft permit notices on their agency websites. Electronic posting of such notices has been demonstrated to be an effective, convenient, and cost-efficient way to provide public notice of permitting-related information to the majority of the public. On October 5th of 2016, the EPA finalized revisions to the public notice provisions of the NSR and Title V permit programs of the Clean Air Act. The effective date of this final rule was November 17th of 2016. EPA's rule revisions removed the mandatory requirement to provide public notice of a draft permit and certain other program actions through publication in a newspaper, and instead provides for electronic noticing, termed e-notice, of these actions. EPA's rule provides flexibility for permitting authorities that implement their own EPA-approved regulations to implement either e-notice or traditional newspaper notice. These permitting authorities must use a single consistent noticing method for all subject notices to avoid confusion. The notice does not prevent permitting authorities from supplementing e-notice with newspaper notice and/or additional means of notification to the public. So similarly to the EPA's rule, the DAQ rules would be revised to remove the mandatory requirement of draft permit noticing through publication in a newspaper and instead publish draft permits through the NCDEQ website. And e-notice, which is already being practiced by the EPA and other permitting agencies, will result in cost savings to the DAQ over newspaper publication and will enable DAQ to provide notice of draft permits more quickly and efficiently. Newspaper by the numbers. So here's just some statistics on the declining levels of newspaper circulation. So print newspaper circulation in the US has dropped by approximately 70% from 2005 levels. And this trend also applies to viewing newspapers online. In the past 4 years, the 100 largest newspapers have had a 40% decrease in their monthly unique page views. In 2025, Pew Research Center conducted a survey of adults in the US and determined that 56% of Americans often get their news from a smartphone, computer, or tablet, while only 7% get their news from print newspapers or magazines. And here is a graphic of the US daily newspaper circulation, which continues to decline. And this is from the Pew Research Center surveys. For the most part, daily newspaper circulation nationwide continues to decline, falling to just under 21 million in 2022, according to projections using data from the Alliance for Audited Media. And weekday circulation is down 8% from the previous year and 32% from 5 years prior, when it was just over 30 million. So here are the 3 affected rules regarding public participation in subchapter O2Q. So the first one is 15A and CIC O2Q 0307, which is public participation procedures, which is for non-Title V, and that currently requires newspaper publication and stakeholder email notifications for any non-Title V draft permit requiring notice, i.e. those listed in Rule O2Q 0306A. And the second affected rule is O2Q 0521, which is titled Public Participation, and that's for Title V. And that currently requires website publication and stakeholder notification for any draft Title V permit that requires public notice, and newspaper publication of new draft Title V permits, draft Title V permits with a scheduled hearing, and prevention of significant deterioration draft permits. And the third affected rule would be O2Q 0710, which is public notice and opportunity for public hearing, which is for air toxics, and that currently requires newspaper and stakeholder notification of draft permits for facilities making a demonstration pursuant to O2Q 0709A2 and permits with significant public interest. And we're looking at making the rule language consistent between all 3 of these. And the DAQ also publishes the O2Q 0307 and 0710 notices on the DAQ website. And here are 2 of the unaffected noticing processes that are not changing in this rulemaking. So the first one is 15A and CIC O2Q 0113, which is notification in areas without zoning. So prior to submitting a permit application for a new or expanded facility in an area without zoning, the applicant is required to publish notice of their intent to file the application in a newspaper of general circulation and post a sign on the property, and that does not apply to state or local governments. And the second one is process for noticing a facility's intent to construct a modification prior to permit review. And this is established pursuant to General Statute 143-215.108 and allows applicants of certain types of permit changes to begin construction after applying for a permit modification if the facility publishes notice of their intent to construct in accordance with the statute. And DAQ receives proof of publication and notice of intent. DAQ reviews and sends recommendation to the director and also notifies the permittee of its determination in that noticing process. So the current status and next steps, we're currently determining the scope of the rulemaking, and our next steps are to finalize the scope and to draft the rules and the fiscal note / regulatory impact analysis. And here's a tentative rulemaking timeline. So the draft rules to the AQC would be in May. The request to the EMC to proceed to comment and hearing would be in July. Public comment period and hearing in August to October. Adoption by the EMC in November, and the Rules Review Commission approval in December. And the rules would be tentatively effective in January of 2027. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Thank you for that presentation. I have a question just for mostly for my own education. At what point in the permitting process are public notices put out?
It's at the very end of the process.
So they've already undergone technical review?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner Smith?
So I know there are some state statutes that require particular types of notices to still be done by newspaper publication. I assume this is not one of them, so we don't have any.
Right. That
Statutory
was for
requirement.
one of the other unaffected noticing processes, but not for this one.
And are you all still sorting out then how you would do the e-notices? Or is it,
We're currently using the e-notice process already on our website.
so you're putting a notification on the website? Are you sending any other electronic notifications?
Yeah, there's also a mailing list that gets sent out.
Okay, and can you describe a little bit who's on the mailing list?
I'm not exactly sure who all, but I know like stakeholders and anyone who signs up for the mailing list. I think you can sign up like there's a thing like at the public hearings that you can sign up for those, and I think on like there might be stuff on the website, but I'm not exactly sure the extent of that.
Yeah, okay. I am curious whether county health departments get notifications.
I'm not sure on that.
Are there any plans to do any kind of research how to reach different communities? Because it's not a one size fits all. Like, you know, urban communities, sure, we'll get our news through all kinds of different sort of channels, but rural communities are very, very different, and get notifications or information through very different channels. Is there any plan to sort of look into that?
Yes, we are definitely looking into that, and we are planning on including that information in the RIA.
Great, thank you.
Were you going to say something?
Yes, sir. If I may, Mr. Chairman, and just to clarify for Commissioner Chelminsky, you know, while we are providing website notices currently, the rule requires us for certain permit actions to also do that in the newspaper. And so that's where we're not really consistent with what the federal rules now say, that we need to have a single, what's it called, a single consistent noticing method. And so that's what we're attempting to do here.
To expand a little bit on the issue of rural communities, what are some of the newspapers that you currently advertise in? I know they need to be local, but what are the names of some of them?
If I may, I mean, it could be any of the newspapers still in circulation across the state, depending on the particular location of the facility that's applied for a permit that requires noticing at the point that we have a draft permit prepared. The challenge these days is some of those more local papers only run once a week, twice a week, maybe not even once a week. If it's outside of the Raleigh, Charlotte areas, for example, where the NNO and the Charlotte Observer run daily, those more local publications run infrequently. And so you have to get in the queue well in advance of their one weekly run, which has the effect of somewhat extending our timelines. And so this has the potential to make us a little bit more efficient in those cases.
Well, as an avid reader of the Tideland News, that's where I see public notices.
Right.
It's one of those weekly local publications. That a lot of people, the world everyone does not live on their phone. Okay. Do online news sites like NNO, do they carry your public notices on their website? Can someone get to them from the website?
Yeah. Say that question, and make sure I understand it.
NNO, Charlotte Observer, major newspapers that have primarily online readership. Are the public notices available online through those news outlets?
Yes, but staff, correct me here, I think it only runs for the one day that we pay, just like it would run in the print version.
Okay.
And so that's still not a good investment for the state currently, in my opinion, given the low readership and the ever increasing cost of that one day run, print and electronically.
Yeah, I will
Okay.
say, like in that one slide, with some of the facts, even the online newspaper numbers, statistics are declining as well as the print.
I would suggest the reason for that is beyond the scope of this committee. Yes, ma'am.
Just curious if you use radio, public service announcements or radio at all?
That might be one.
Have in the past.
So, because I just know from some previous work that some communities really get a lot of news from their local radio.
The more affordable version of that is like a Facebook, social media type of messaging. The specific radio ads, not affordable in most cases, but sometimes certain local radio stations will allow us to have a 30-second spot or a 2-minute spot to explain and announce, say, a public hearing on a draft permit. So we explore that on a case-by-case basis, and a lot of our enhanced outreach for our permitting program kind of defines that on a case-by-case basis.
It sort of saddens me to see local newspapers disappear, but that's, again, as you said, that's a discussion beyond the scope of this. So following up on Facebook, there's some really interesting sort of data in rural communities of other states. That's really where they're distributing information. Are you looking into that platform?
Yeah, we are also looking into what other states are doing.
How many hits on the DAQ webpage do you typically get per week?
We have that information. I don't think we have it with us today, but we can pull that for the next time that we come on this. We can show some web statistics.
Have you looked at the number of hits you get for your public notices of these permits?
Yes, I see staff shaking their head, yes.
I mean, is it 40 people or 4,000 people?
It depends on the permitting project itself. So certain permit projects get more significant public interest than others. But so, you know, if we're, for example, on like a Duke Energy permit, we may get over 100 hits on that website looking for that public notice. Because with the web page where we post the public notice, we're also posting the draft technical review, the draft permit, usually a one-page fact sheet depending on the project, and any other materials like the application related to that permit project. So it really varies. I mean, for smaller projects, sometimes we anticipate significant public interest, but we may only get, 10 people who show up or access that information.
Does anybody turn to the DEQ website for their local news?
I think they turn to the website for information related to public notices of permit projects and rulemaking.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Commissioner Bailey?
Well, I just wanted to point out, since I live in a small town with a once-a-week newspaper, we do get a lot of our information on Facebook. And then sometimes I hear about DEQ information from the local TV station that has a presence on Facebook.
Correct. Yes. So our enhanced outreach team will share, especially for larger permitting projects, they'll share the public notice announcement with local media, and they will typically run stories themselves, even without us paying for that. They will just think it's of interest to their community and they'll run a story. Other things that we do as part of enhanced outreach is, in rural areas, maybe where there's broadband or internet connectivity issues, we will share the public notice materials with local churches and libraries, and they will post that in their communities to make sure that people who do not have access have another way of accessing that material that does not rely on online sources.
I would also suggest that other avid readers of these small local weeklies, a lot of times the small local radio station, which you can actually get without static if the weather's right, they will magnify what they read in the local newspaper.
Yes.
So I'm very concerned about the loss of local newspapers and access to information, because there are a lot of people that just don't do the internet, and they may have a serious interest in one of your permitting actions.
Yeah, and I think it was mentioned previously, we have run paid radio advertisement, but also like the local TV stations. Sometimes local radio stations will just pick up the information and run it themselves just to get the message out to their community.
And sometimes the local Facebook groups get started because of something someone read in their local newspaper.
Correct.
So any other questions or comments on this issue? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, action items, request for approval to proceed to the EMC to request approval of proposed readoption schedule for air quality rules in 15A NCAC 02D and 02Q.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Joelle Burleson with DAQ's Planning Section. Right here. And today I'm here to talk with you about our rule readoption schedule. On slide 2, there are acronyms for your reference. And as you all know from your work on the various committees, General Statute 150B 21.3A requires that we review all our rules every 10 years. The air quality rules were last reviewed by the EMC in 2015, and some of you may have been part of that process. At that time, all the rules that were determined to be necessary were readopted by the EMC between November of 2017 and July of 2020. Today, you have 314 air quality rules in the North Carolina Administrative Code. They're split between 2 subchapters, 15A NCAC 02D, which contains our air pollution control requirements. There are about 225 rules in there. And in 02Q, you have your air quality permit procedures where 89 rules reside. These subchapters are somewhat interrelated, and many of the rules cross-reference one another. For purposes of the readoption schedule, only 313 of those rules will require readoption. The other rule was in effect after January of 2024, and therefore the Rules Review Commission doesn't consider it part of this round of readoption. For the majority of rules, many are federally required or approved under the Clean Air Act under various provisions or authorities, such as Section 110 State Implementation Plan provisions, or Section 111D Emission Guidelines provisions, perhaps Title V and other various authorities. Identification of a rule in the reports when we went through that process as federally required doesn't necessarily preclude that a particular rule, if warranted, could be repealed as part of the adoption process. However, because of the interaction with these federal approvals, we may have to make some form of demonstration for certain rules if we are removing something that could be considered to be less stringent than what was already in place. And it could be something that you've seen us come forward with you to you with before for other rulemaking actions, like a Clean Air Act Section 110L demonstration of non-interference with attainment or maintenance of a national ambient air quality standard. We've done that in the past, some of our rules, and brought that information to you as well. So as part of the process, the initial determination reports, this round, we categorized all our rules as necessary. We held that public comment period after your approval back in May. through July of 2025. No comments were received. The final agency determination reports came to you last September, where all the rules were approved as being necessary. And then in December, the Rules Review Commission approved the reports that were submitted by the EMC. Those reports were then sent from the RRC to the APO, the Joint Legislative Administrative Procedures Oversight Committee of the legislature. And on the 61st day after their receipt of that report, they became effective February 18th of this year. So the next step in the process, as you're likely aware, is that the agency, and that is you for these rules, pursuant to the provisions of 21.3A and the RRC's rules in 26 NCAC 05212, have to approve a readoption schedule and deadline to be provided to the RRC for their approval. So the readoption schedule that's proposed is found in your attachment A. It organizes the 313 air quality rules designated as necessary into 6 groups for readoption by the EMC in a phase schedule to end and be completed by December 1st, 2030. That's the request. And the reason for phasing the rules as we have, it's an approach we use similarly the first time around because of the number of rules, the different stakeholders that might be interested in the various groups of rules or not interested in some cases. And just the workload in general for all the internal and external stakeholders, and same staff will be working on readoption of all the rules as well. So the 6 groups include the rules as presented in this slide, and we've broken them out to provide you information regarding, how many rules you might be looking at over time. This is a summary version of the fuller table that is in your attachment A. And with that, we would be requesting that the AQC approve the proposed readoption schedule for 15A NCAC O2D and O2Q in attachment A, and the deadline of December 1st, 2030 to proceed to the EMC tomorrow to request approval of the schedule for submittal to the Rules Review Commission. And we are requesting this approval by the EMC tomorrow, as we understand that is the standard procedure that the chair has laid out previously.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Commissioner Smith?
I don't know if this is a question as much as a comment. Maybe it is a question. It would be helpful to see where the EMC steps are in this. I mean, I'm assuming when you have rule drafting and fiscal note within a certain date range, and then you skip over to public hearing. So the period between the completion of the fiscal note and the date of the public hearing, that's the opportunity for the rules to go through the appropriate EMC committee and then to the full EMC for a vote on whether to send them to public hearing.
That is correct. And we simply didn't, include that in the slide schedule. We know that there are instances where we may need some flexibility, perhaps to adjust a rule from one group to another, or where your workload on the commission may be too heavy to address everything at once at the same time. So we've tried to build in a little bit of buffer, but we'll be going through the standard rulemaking process, permanent rulemaking process for readoption, as you have with your other divisions rules. So we'll be coming to you with concept, et cetera, through our committee for each group, and a regular schedule as well. So.
Just coming out of the discussion of the dam safety rules, I guess, I just want to keep an eye on how much time the EMC actually has to work on these rules, because I feel like we're getting squeezed in this process. There's some of these, and this isn't necessarily about the air quality rules. This is a general comment, because I've seen a number of timelines where there's a lot of upfront time in terms of rule drafting and working with stakeholders, and I understand the need to do all that. But we really need to avoid a situation where we feel like we don't have time to actually get rules discuss thoroughly in committee and resolve issues before we're having to vote to send them out to public notice. So this is just a general comment that I'd like to keep an eye on that, because I do feel like the commission's getting a little squeezed here and then being told, well, we've got to push it through because we've got this timeline from the Rules Review Commission. So again, this isn't about you or the DAQ rules necessarily, but it's a more general, I think, problem that I'm seeing.
Well, we did build in a little bit of buffer on the end because again, meetings get canceled, et cetera. But certainly, you know, as we work through our stakeholder process, we'll have a better sense of how much effort any individual grouping is going to take and can adjust the schedules accordingly. What we're held to at RRC is that final deadline. I think, as far as I understand, that these dates in between are just something that gives them assurance that we're working on a process, on a schedule to get to that deadline and not going to end up at the end having to request some form of extension.
I find myself strongly concurring with Commissioner Smith, and I would
What
suggest,
did I do wrong?
I would suggest that we will have an increasing opportunity to rely on our staff, and our new executive director, Mr. Evans, has vast knowledge of air quality rules, processes, EPA requirements and all that. And we as a committee, because it's 314 rules, we need to rely on not only Mr. Evans, but the other staff that will be coming in to support the EMC in this process. I do have one question. Is there an opportunity in this process to consolidate rules? 314 rules is a lot. If they can be consolidated, reducing the number of rules, 10 or 15%, is that possible?
We would have to look at it. It may have impacts that, you know, we wouldn't think of besides just trying to reduce number of rules. How they're referenced in permits, for example, and how much work or effort it might be to have to revamp those sorts of things. There are provisions in the APA that require you only go a certain number of levels down in a rule. So there'll be, to some extent, revamping of a few rules where we'll be reducing the depth of paragraphs in a rule or the range of paragraphs in rules. So that may actually cause us to have to break the rules apart in some instances, but we can certainly look to see if there's opportunity as we go through this process to reduce rules. And certainly, you know, we'll be continuing to look and see if there are rules that are no longer necessary or warranted as various federal evolution takes place throughout this process. So we'll keep
Okay.
that in mind, but I don't
you.
know that we won't have a mandate relative to a percentage reduction in number of rules currently or anything like that.
I just threw that out there just because 314 is a lot. That's cool. Thank you. Chair Solomon?
Yeah, to add on, to agree with both Commissioner Smith and yourself, Chairman Ellison. Council and I have been working on this, and she probably won't say everything I've said, but we do have a little bit of a tendency here, whether it's the department not wanting to just jump in and do rule readoption or it's the RRC, but we are a little bit back-ended, in my opinion, on our rules in this whole line, because all the rules have to be readopted in the state. And so the RRC, and I don't want to speak for them, and I don't want to have council speak, but they're only looking at doing a certain amount of rules at a given time anyway. So if we try to say, instead of 50 rules, we're going to give you 100 rules this time, they're going to balk and say, oh, no, we can't handle that on our end. So it's very important we do this up front. And behind the scenes, what I've been pushing is, why are other departments getting their rules processed before us with RRC? The environmental rules are the most important rules in the state, and I'll maintain that as chair of the EMC. So I am pushing to get more of our rules up earlier to the extent possible, knowing in a way the department would like to wait a little bit, or staff would, because this is not exactly fun. But to Commissioner Smith's point, we can't, as an EMC, get backed up to the very end and then have these discussions and these debates with ourselves and with RRC as we get backed up. It's just not going to be very healthy. And so I'm trying to push that, and I've heard what y'all said today, and I do agree with Commissioner Smith and you, Commissioner Ellison, but we will continue to try to expedite these rules in front of the RRC for their scheduling as well. But
And
Waiting is not the solution here, and the
Not at
environment is
all, and
much
that's-
more
that's-
important than that.
how we got where we are, and I would ask, this is 314 rules for OAH to go through?
Yes. 313.
313.
Sorry.
Thank you. That
have
reduces
eliminated
their
5 already.
workload.
But I do
And
think to the
that's-
point, we're not gonna come up at the end and say, let's double up now. Because they're gonna say the schedule's been set. Now is the time to be aggressive with the schedule and move our rules up if we're gonna move them up.
Understood, but there have been criticisms raised by OAH, particularly in fiscal impacts of rules, not necessarily from the air quality, but just to the EMC in general. I understand that the department has been missing one economist. I don't recall the details, but I would suggest the department beef up their economist staff because of this tidal wave of rules coming through, not just for air quality, but for everybody else. Any other questions or comments on this issue? Council? Sir. Okay, the department has a request to advance these rules to the full commission, waive the, waive the 30-day notice, I'm sorry. Do we have a motion?
30-day waiver is tomorrow. You just need to move them on today.
We don't need a,
30-day waiver is tomorrow for the full commission to consider this.
does
committee
not the
just needs-
committee need to have a motion to move this to the full commission?
Yeah.
Okay,
But that's the only thing you need
That's-
today.
right. So we need a motion to move this to the full commission schedule for tomorrow.
I'll make that motion.
Commissioner
I'll
Wright,
Make the motion that we approve the proposed readoption schedule for 15A NCAC O2D and O2Q in attachment A, and the deadline of December 1, 2030, and proceed to the EMC to request approval of the schedule for submittal to the Rules Review Commission.
thank you, Commissioner Wright. Do we have a second? We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambient information reporter.
It's action item number 2.
Here you go.
Action item number 2 is a request for approval to proceed to the EMC, to proceed to public comment and hearing on proposed revisions to 15A NCAC O2Q.0807 to add Title 5 exclusionary provisions for non-emergency stationary reciprocating internal combustion engines and the accompanying regulatory impact analysis.
And Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Nelson begins, I just want to share with the committee that the PowerPoint slides for this have been slightly tweaked. So if you downloaded them earlier in the week, you may want to go back to the website and follow along. We simplified them a little bit to make sure we get through the examples that the committee requested when we came as a concept a few months ago. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Brad Nelson. I'm with the North Carolina Division Air Quality Planning Branch. I'm here to present these amendments to Rule 15A NCA O2Q 0807. The slide just has some acronyms that you may see during the presentation. O2Q 0800 exclusionary rules were established in 1999 for categories of facilities that may be exempt from the requirements of Title V procedures, MAC or maximum achievable control technology, or national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants by defining their potential emissions to be below major source thresholds of 100 tons per year of each regulated pollutant, 10 tons a year of each hazardous air pollutant, and 25 tons per year of all HAP combined. And there's also criteria set out in each one of those rules. The exclusionary rules are typically used for non-continuous and intermittent processes, things that don't operate 87, 60 hours per year. We also have in our O2Q 0900 rules permanent exemptions. These were established for categories of facilities to exempt them from requirements of construction and operation permits. One of the requirements of that exemption is that they not be required to have a Title V permit. And it also has to, comply with the requirements in that 900 rule. One of those 900 rules is a permanent exemption for emergency generators and stationary reciprocating internal combustion engines. We established this in 2008. This applies to both emergency and non-emergency engines at a facility whose only source at that facility that would require a permit are those engines, either emergency or non-emergency, and whose facility-wide emissions are below the major source thresholds. The other applicable federal and state requirements will still apply. At issue is in the 0903 rule is that we excluded the emergency and non-emergency engines. However, technically, some non-emergency engines cannot be exempt from the minor source permitting as intended in 0903 because those sources have a potential emissions exceeding major source thresholds without the 800 exclusionary rule that redefines their potential emissions, which are based on 87, 60 hours per year to actual emissions. So what the DAQ is proposing to amend O2Q 0807 to include provisions for Title V exclusion of non-emergency stationary rice based on actual emissions. The exemption will allow non-emergency engines to redefine their potential to emit based on actual emissions using engine emission factors, hours of operation, fuel consumption for the year. Prior to being exempt for this rule, the facilities will have to submit a permit applicability to demonstrate that they meet the requirement of the rule. And the proposed rule also will require either annual reporting if the facility-wide emissions are below 75% of the major source thresholds, or quarterly reporting if the facility-wide emissions are equal to or greater than 75% of the major source thresholds. And down there below is what 75% of those major source thresholds would be. And this, the way this is crafted is similar to another 0800 rule that's currently for coating operations. It's similar to that rule. So to provide an example, a facility that may have two 500 horsepower diesel-fired engines, if you use the AP42 emission factors and you calculate it at 87, 60 hours per year, you'll see that NOx emission rate is 135 tons per year, and therefore is over the 100 tons per year. Therefore, it would be a major source based on potential emissions. Now, if this source said, we only use 200,000 gallons a year of diesel fuel a year, that's over over the years that they've been operating, the potential or the actual emissions would be 62 tons per year for that NOx, the NOx emissions. Therefore, it would not be a Title V source, and they could then, operate under the 0807 rule. Some examples of kind of engines that use this is maybe a construction company that uses an engine to provide power to a rock crusher, or a metal scrap yard that has an engine that powers a car crusher. And these are examples of engines that are not likely to operate 87, 60 hours per year. So their actual emissions are significantly lower than the potential emissions, which are based on 87, 60 hours per year. Many people may have questions about data centers and how this would affect here. If we use an example, if they want to install a number of 500 horsepower engines firing diesel fuel, and these new engines are certified to meet emission standard of the 2.6 grams per horsepower hour of CO, which would be the limiting pollutant for this new engine. Each engine would emit 12.55 tons per year. So this facility could install up to 7 non-emergency engines for reaching the 100 tons per year. However, this facility is a true minor source, so it doesn't need to redefine its potential emissions as actual emissions to avoid the major source, because they're already under it. However, if they want to operate these as non-emergency engines, calculate the total amount of fuel that they can combust before a Title V source, we converted the emission factor to a ounce per diesel combusted, and then back calculated the total amount of fuel that they could use across all the engines at the site. So they could use O2Q 0807 to demonstrate that if we use less than 646,116 gallons of diesel fuel, we will be under the major source thresholds. And therefore, we don't need a Title V permit. This rule also works if you have a number of different types of engines, or different size engines or different fuel engines. You would just, in your permit applicability determination, you would say, we have this number of this size engine, this number of this size engine, and we're going to use this amount of fuel. And then when we calculate it, we are under the 100 tons per year major source threshold. The regulatory impact analysis was developed and approved by OSBM on March the 5th. The estimated range of impacts in the RA are dependent on reporting frequency, whether they're annual or quarterly. And all values here are in $24. For newly exempt facilities, the net savings ranges from $4,038 to $7,677. There is a net cost for facilities that were previously exempted under O2Q 0807 from a cost of $3,444 to $6,482. And this would just be a one-time cost for the permit applicability determination. The cost to the DAQ ranges from a net savings of $653 to a net cost of $4,000 per facility. And the total net impact ranged from a savings of $8,330 to a total cost of $9,805 per facility. And the net present value ranges from $7,785 to a net cost of $9,805, discounted at 7%. We also reviewed the new aggregate financial cost, which is required for 2025 regulation for the executive, the regulation from the Executives in Need of Scrutiny Act, which is we had to calculate the aggregate financial costs. And these are just all the costs with no savings included. For a newly exempt facility, that number is $14,919, or a net present value of $13,943. For newly exempt facilities, that cost is $9,394, or a net present value of $8,780. Since the exact number of facilities that might be impacted by the proposed rule amended is unknown, the DAQ calculated a per facility impacts and back calculate the number of facilities that would need to reach before it went over any of the thresholds in the RAINS Act. And we used two different types of assumptions. The first assumption was said all of the facilities would apply in the first year. And then the second approach was that they'd all be kind of spaced out over the 5 years. So to reach an aggregate financial cost of $1 million over a 5-year period, the first approach estimates at least 24 facilities in that will perform quarterly monitoring, or 48 facilities are required to do annual reporting to utilize the proposed rules, and those facilities would need to apply for the permit exemption in that first year. Second approach, 69 or 36 facilities we required to do would be before we would exceed the level to perform quarterly reporting, or 69 that would be required to do annual reporting. And this approach assumes that those facilities are spaced out over a 5-year period, 2027 to 2031. In our looking back at some of the permits that we received, or some of the exemptions we received, the DAQ received 3 formal requests for permanent exemptions for non-emergency engines under O2Q 0903 over the past 6 years, so roughly once every other year. So it's expected that most facilities utilize proposed rule will have emissions less than 75% of the thresholds, so they will only need annual reporting. So we're not expecting to be impacted by the proposed rule amendment, and applying to use the regulatory exclusion provisions to be less than the amounts, and is not expected to trigger any new requirements of the RAINS Act. Just a kind of a timeline of how we see the rule moving forward. And a recommendation, I guess. You have any questions, I imagine?
Did you run your approach with the 2 assumptions? Did you run that through your counsel to confirm that you're going to be below RAINS Act requirements?
We did, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So you haven't gotten any official feedback on those 2 assumptions?
No.
Okay. Questions?
I have a question, and it may not be specific to the non-emergency RICE,
Okay.
but, and I acknowledge I'm having worst-case scenario thinking, but it seems like a lot of the guardrails are potential emissions and annual numbers. And I'm thinking about most air pollution, public health emergencies are caused by, you know, specific events. Like what if there's a thermal inversion and then you have multiple sources operating RICE? And how do we protect against short-term spikes in air pollution that could affect those nearby?
It's a very good question.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Cheminsky. So I think the proposal doesn't change any of the applicable requirements that impact emission standards that apply to these engines. So all of the new source performance standards, all of the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants, specific visible emission standards at the state level or sulfur dioxide standards at the state level, all still apply. All that this does is expand the flexibility in the use of this prohibitory small rule and exemption rule to the non-emergency engines. But the underlying requirements to comply with the emission standards still all remain. Nothing changes there.
Go ahead. I think you're.
But those are based on potential emissions and annual numbers, right? Or stack testing, I guess.
Not necessarily the standard, the emission standards that I'm speaking to with the national or the new source performance standards and the NESHAPs. NESHAPs apply, of course, but if they're major sources, but they're also generally available control technology rules that apply to the minor sources, and new source performance standards that apply to some of these engines as well. So again, none of that changes here with this proposal. They still all need to comply with those standards which are designed to protect public health.
So to follow up on what Ann was asking, who's going to be monitoring this or making sure that there's not all of a sudden an additional generator or they're using a lot more fuels, which gets them out of the Title V?
Right. That is part of the reporting that they'll be doing. So we have the reporting set up as annually if you're below the 75-ton threshold, because we feel you're going to stay under there. But once you reach 75 and you're getting closer to 100, we want quarterly reporting. So we want to make sure, you know, as you're getting closer to that level where you're exceeding that level and then maybe becoming a major source, you know, we want to know. So that's why we're requiring the quarterly reporting in this rule.
So it's self-reporting.
They're reporting to the DAQ or their local office, right?
Other questions?
This is, I guess, a more technical rule draft question. I can pull this up again. In the rule, when it talks about a facility under C, it talks about a facility with potential emissions that are less than the thresholds that are listed. And then it goes on to say, for purposes of this rule, potential emissions from emergency generators and stationary internal combustion engines shall be determined using, and this is new language, actual annual fuel consumption, which was a little confusing to me because I thought the process we were talking about was you're either calculating based on potential emissions, which may put you in the Title V category, or you have the option of calculating based on actual emissions, which take you out of the Title V category and give you the greater flexibility in terms of the permitting process.
Mhm.
But now we're defining potential emissions based on actual fuel use.
Right. Right, that's kind of how you're removing you're allowing some of these processes that don't operate 8760, but you want to look at what they're actually doing, and that's kind of what we're allowing versus just saying, you have an engine, you have to use 8760 hours per year. That's the way, whether or not you operate that many hours or not, or use that much fuel or not.
Yeah, and I get that concept. I guess what I'm struggling with a little bit is that we're mixing up categories of potential emissions versus actual emissions by suddenly defining potential emissions by reference to actual emissions. And so it seems like that could be clarified a little bit if what you're doing is allowing these units to demonstrate that they're below these thresholds based on their actual emissions, then that's what they're doing. They're not calculating potential emissions, but based on actual numbers.
Okay.
That's the confusion, I
Okay.
guess, for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I can shed a little bit more light on that. I mean, the purpose of the 2Q 800 rules is to redefine potentials as actuals. And then we're putting forth legally enforceable procedures and conditions here in both this rule and the complementary 903 rule that must be met to be exempt from permitting altogether. But the 807 rule brings into the fold the non-emergency engines now, whereas it was just the emergency engines previously that could only redefine their potentials as actuals.
Could you flip back to your
Actually, they're
recommendation?
defining their actuals as potentials. But I take your point.
Yes, ma'am.
And I would suggest that, thank you for the two examples you gave, because those are exactly the types of operations, car crushers, that's the type of operation that this change, the type of business that this change will support. Would you flip back to the recommendation, please? Are there any other questions?
Just these, I want to call them generators. Is that a correct term? RICE, do they RICE have control technology built in, or?
Some of them do, and that's kind of why the rule as it sits now, we just had for emergency engines, just limited on fuel, which were based on AP 42 factors. These new engines are now certified to meet various EPA tier levels. They're much more efficient. Some of them have, particulate control technologies. A lot of diesel engines have that, catalyzed particulate filters. And so the engine that you purchase will be, you have it certified to meet a certain emission level.
Does the rule include any requirement that they contain best available control technology?
It does not. But if you don't, I mean, you're going to be limiting, the number of engines that you could use, like, for a data center, they're not going to use a bunch of old engines that, are very dirty. They wouldn't be able to run those engines and still stay under, the 100 tons per year. They'd become a major source. You want to probably operate a newer, more efficient engine.
So there's an assumption that they'll choose the newer, more efficient engine because they can run it longer.
Well, I mean,
Could you repeat that question, please?
I guess I'm saying there's no requirement that they choose
Right.
an engine with better control technology. There's an assumption that they will because there's more, they can run them longer, perhaps.
They also get much better fuel economy. There's an added incentive there.
And if I may add, let's not lose sight of those aforementioned state and federal rules, especially the federal rules, which establish the types of controls or the particular procedures that and standards that must be met, depending on size of engine, fuel type, et cetera. For us to describe all of the requirements of those federal rules, we'd be here till 4 o'clock. It's a significant, confusing set of federal rules that apply to these engines. So none of that's changing here, but some of those specifics of what's required on an engine by engine basis depends on a wide variety of specifics of the engine, fuel type and size being the main two.
Without any other questions, the department is making a recommendation and we need a motion to move forward.
I make a motion.
You have to read it.
I make a motion that the committee approve and propose amendments to 15 NCAC 02Q 0807 and the accompanying regulatory impact analysis to proceed to the Environmental Management Commission to request approval to proceed to public comment.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Seeing none opposed, the motion carries.
Procedural question, Mr. Chairman. What are we going to do? Commissioner Smith had a good comment over there, and I want to know how we're going to clean that up a little bit, because it does, you can't say potential and actual in the same breath and say that's legally clear. Is that the committee's recommendation that the current language is how we want to move forward through the EMC?
That was the motion made and passed.
Okay, very good. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
And,
We'll work on that. Okay, thank you.
okay. No? Okay, request for approval of hearing officer's report and final adoption of the RIA. Wait, yeah,
Yeah.
We list the EMC items. but that's-
I get it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Director's remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Recognizing that we're a little past time, I'll just say thank you to the committee and thank you to the staff for your patience and working through those items today. I'll just keep all my remarks for tomorrow's full commission meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bailey, we'll start with you. Any comments?
No comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith?
No thanks.
No comments? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you. What are you laughing at?